Well, welcome back to our study on 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. This week we are in 1st Thessalonians chapter 2, and I'm really only going to go through verse 16 in this video. I'm going to put verses 17 through 20 on with the next video in the series about chapter 3. That's for two reasons. Number one, chapter 3 is pretty short. It's pretty easy to get through in one sitting, and those verses 17 through 20 require a little bit of explanation. But also because verses 17 through 20 actually do set up the themes of chapter 3 in a way that perhaps they are better situated there than in chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 starts out with Paul talking to the Thessalonians after commending them for their witness in the world around them. If you remember from chapter 1, he goes on this he goes on this journey of explaining how their witness, the Thessalonians' witness, has reached him even where he's at in Corinth, and he is very proud of them. So now he is going to backtrack. This is in order to give them a little bit of peace and security in their own lives and what they're facing in their world around them. He backtracks a little bit and sets up some more praise of them and just inspiration for them by using his own journeys. Now, if you remember from Acts chapter 16 and 17, we get a little bit of explanation about what Paul's talking about here in those chapters. In those chapters, Paul goes to Philippi, where he is arrested, imprisoned, beaten, and meets some people like Lydia, who help him a lot in Philippi. He sets up a church there. And from there, he goes to Thessalonica, where he again faces some opposition. They look to arrest him, but can't find him. Instead of arresting him, they arrest Jason, a man named Jason, and hold him accountable. And it kind of pushes Paul out of the city. We get the impression a lot earlier than he would have liked. He seems to have wanted to stay around Thessalonica a little bit more and train the people, teach the people a little bit more. Now, he brings that up because he, again, does not have, he wants to remind them of his position among them as the one who has founded this church, who has taken the time to be with them and work with them. But he also wants to remind them of this visit because he wants them to remember his own character in that visit. The idea is these people do not have Bibles. They don't have firsthand knowledge of Jesus. They don't have written accounts of Jesus. They don't even have, at least they probably don't even have what we would consider the Old Testament on hand. They have very little in the way of Christian resources to maintain their faith. All they have is the memory of Paul's visit. And so that visit becomes very important. It becomes important, one, because they need to model Paul's character, and two, because the stories that Paul told them about Jesus, and Timothy for a little while told them about Jesus, are likely all they have of Christian example. So this becomes very important for them, this reminder. Think back, he says, to when I was there among you. How did we approach you? And he uses this three-part metaphor. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding the first part because we don't know exactly what word Paul used in the Greek. There are two possibilities that are separated by one letter of difference, and we don't know which word Paul is using. One word means gentle, kind, compassionate, and the other word means infant. I like that second word a little bit better because I think it sets up a better family metaphor. I think Paul is working through a structure of family metaphors, and so that works better. But as the church fathers said, they were aware of this fact that we don't know which word he was talking about. As they said, either way, it's intelligible as innocence. Paul is coming to them innocently, but it doesn't matter in the end of it. I'm going to use it the way I like it because it's the way I like it. And I think you can make a strong case for it as infant. And that first metaphor is Paul saying, we came to you as infants. Infants are people who are non-threatening by nature. They are not greedy, which we see Paul's uh, one of the accusations made about Paul after he left is that he was just coming for their money, that he was greedy, that he was trying to just gain clout and gain influence and gain money. And he's saying, no, we came to you like infants, helpless. We came to you completely helpless, completely trusting, completely dependent on others. He is going to talk about work, and we're going to get there a little bit later, but this idea that we can't be greedy. We can't have been greedy. We can't have been trying to flatter you and trying to gain influence over you. We were like an infant there among you. We were completely helpless. You took us in, is what he's kind of saying. You were good to us in the same way that we have to be good to infants who can't take care of themselves. He then goes on to back that up or extend that metaphor a little bit and change it. Again, keeping in that family motif, he says, you are like a nurse taking care of her child. Now, either a nurse or a nursing mother. The word there is for a woman who is breastfeeding. So the picture seems to be of a natural mother breastfeeding, even though we don't have a specific word there. We don't have that specific phrase. That seems to be the picture that's going through Paul's head, not of a hired nursemaid, but of a mother taking care of her child. The idea being that we gave you the resources that keep us alive. We gave you life itself. We nourished you and we protected you the same way a mother cares for her children. We did not come as greedy individuals. We did not come seeking flattery or praise or anything else. We did not come for our own benefit. No, instead, we gave everything we had to you so that you could have life and you could grow. This becomes important. And we'll get there when Paul starts talking about the hardships that the Thessalonians are facing in their own community. This idea that they came, they're innocent. They are not people who can take advantage of the system, but rather they are people who are trying to help the Thessalonians grow. That's important. And then they say, and Paul says, not only that, but we gave you what we had. We gave you the life that we had in ourselves. We desired you to grow, and so we gave you the very message of the gospel, because that's what mothers do for children. And then he kind of takes a little bit of a tangent. He talks about his own labor among them. Now, we know from other sources that Paul had a trade, likely tent making, some sort of sewing, some sort of stitching. And it seems like what he did was went to Thessalonica and set up shop in one of the market stalls. And in that way, he worked among them. Now, it is important to remember that Paul likely was not very, he was not making a lot of money off of this. This was not a very affluent trade for him because, as in a lot of other places, the tradespeople worked off of reputation. If you're just coming to town and setting up a shop, people aren't going to trust you. They aren't going to work with you. They aren't going to partner with you. Paul's point here is not that he never took money from communities. It's that he worked hard and didn't burden the Thessalonian community. Instead, he labored, he worked for his earnings. He wasn't greedy, trying to suck off of them. He was giving to them, and he was putting in an honest day's work on top of his ministry to them as a community. We do know from Philippians that during this time, Paul was reliant on the Philippian generosity. Again, likely Lydia from Acts 16. She seems to have been somewhat wealthy and seems to have funded Paul's missionary journeys to an extent. Um, Not to say that there weren't others in the Philippian community that were helping Paul as well, but she seems to be the dominant patron. Um, Paul took that money and used it to fund his missionary journeys. He downplays that here in Thessalonica, in this letter to the Thessalonians, because there's no need to bring up that he was dependent on the Philippians. His goal is to show that he was not greedy, that he was not taking advantage of them, because there seems to be a rumor going around that that's what he was there for. He was just a traveling preacher who was taking advantage of them, and instead he wants to point out his hardships in Philippi, his hardships among the Thessalonians, which he's going to return to, and that he worked while he was there. He wasn't just dependent on alms from that community. So bringing up the whole story about the Thessalonian, or about the Philippians giving to him the money that he needed, that wouldn't have really factored into this, because it doesn't relate to how he was among the people of Thessalonica. So, and that becomes important. His last of the family metaphors is that he was their father. He was the one who was training them. So all of this, all that he has said about his hardships, about his work ethic, about what he went through in Philippi and Thessalonica, how he trained them, or how he mothered them, everything about that is set up for this. He's saying, instead of being greedy and usurping, I was a father. I was the one training you how to live appropriately so that you could take those lessons on and continue to work and continue to grow. So Paul's idea is that he becomes the father figure for them. But this is so that they can be imitators of Paul. This is a big lesson for the Thessalonians. Imitate Paul. As Paul has said, or as I've said earlier, Paul did not leave them with scriptures. Paul only left them with a few stories of Jesus and his own ministry. That's what they have to go on. And so he's reminding them of his character, his morality when he was with them, and saying, be like me as I imitate Jesus. So all of his detractors who are saying Paul was a fraud, he's saying, remember who I was. You know who I was. Remember that. And so I will get to that. He says that that's the important thing. And the last thing that he's doing in this passage is that he is talking to them, and he's saying, you know this because you're also facing the same opposition that I faced and that the Christians in Judea face. Now, he makes a reference to the Jews and the idea that they crucified Jesus. He does this not because of any anti-Semitic reason, and sadly, many Christians have used this passage as a way to justify anti-Semitic ideals. But what he is saying very clearly is the same way that Jesus and your Jewish brothers and sisters, including Paul himself, have faced opposition, that's the way that the Thessalonians are facing opposition. They are facing the same kind of opposition that Jesus and other Christians have faced from people who are supposed to love them. Thessalonians. The Thessalonians don't love you the way they should, but that's okay. There are Jews who don't love Jews the way they should. Even Jesus. The people who should love you aren't loving you. And that's sad, but it's part of living life as a Christian. Now, we don't want to be obnoxious. We don't want to be out there being jerks and being bad representatives of Jesus. But at the same time, Paul wants to remind them, I did everything right. I did everything right. I came to you, I preached Jesus, I preached the love of Jesus, the acceptance, this grace that we have found. I worked hard, and I was still hated, beaten, and imprisoned and forced out of town. You will have the same things. Not because you're, not for any other reason than because you are Christians and you are trying to live like Jesus. This is the encouragement that he wants to leave with them. It's sad that we go through trials. It is sad that we are not always loved and respected the way we should be. But we still need to focus on who Jesus is and continue to try to love the people who are around us, even when they don't love us. That's what he concludes that paragraph with. We're going to pick it up next time with verse 17 and go on about how Paul longs to see the Thessalonians and can't. But for now, if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the comments. I'd love to deal with what's on your mind as you read these passages and work through this with you. And until we meet again, God bless.